Get the home field advantage every time with Fairfield by Marriott, official hotel partner of the NCAA. Whether you're a student athlete working toward your championship dreams or your team's biggest fan, Fairfield by Marriott has everything you need to get ready for game day. From comfortable guest rooms to complimentary hot breakfast, Fairfield is part of the Marriott Bonvoy portfolio of hotels and official hotel partner of the NCAA. Visit fairfield.marriott.com to book your next game day stay.
And now a special motorcycle weather report from Progressive.
Well, today you can expect lots of cloud cover with 0% chance of raining on your parade because you'll be riding your motorcycle vroom vroom. That rumbling low-pressure system beneath you should give way to a relaxing commute and the sudden urge to take the scenic route everywhere you go because dagnabbit, you're having fun out there. That's your forecast. Back to you.
This has been a special motorcycle weather report from Progressive, where every day's a beautiful day to ride with coverage from America's #1 motorcycle insurer. Get a quote today and see what you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
Welcome into The Verge, a show which covers the Baltimore Orioles minor leagues. The Verge is part of BSL Radio. Baltimore Sports and Life is dedicated to analysis and discussion on the Orioles, Baltimore Ravens, and the University of Maryland. The site has a team of writers providing coverage of those teams and houses live streaming content weekly. Join the conversations at the message board, like BSL on Facebook, and follow BSL on Twitter.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts and Q&A lets us be more creative on another level. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Welcome on The Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phil and Nick Stevens. And we're going to get into a lot of topics on tonight's show, including the Aberdeen Ironbirds, who are seeing a lot of interesting trends with their players right now. Some of the prospects that got off to slow starts are starting to pick things up. And some guys that may have flown under the radar a little bit coming into this year have been key contributors to them of late. We're also going to talk about the success of Cade Povich and how he is performing at AA Bowie. But first, we're going to shout out a new member of our Patreon community, as we do every episode. We have a new member to welcome. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, we got a new patron signed up for a whole year at the AA level, Praveen George. Thank you. Welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy your stay. And maybe you'll get up to AAA or the majors in a year or two.
Thank you, Praveen, for your support. And as a reminder, you can sign up for Patreon for as little as $3 a month and have access to our WhatsApp group and get your shout out on the show. And then at the $5 and $10 levels, you can have access to exclusive content, including daily recaps, as well as monthly top 50 prospect updates. And when you tune into the next monthly top 50 prospect update, you might have some things change as far as players at Aberdeen are concerned, because there are some players who got off to slow starts that are starting to pick things up. And we saw this over the course of last week, which was an interesting week for the Ironbirds. On one hand, they ended up with a split at home against Hudson Valley, a team that had beat them pretty bad in April when they went up to New York to play them. On the other hand, the first 3 games for Aberdeen were all victories, and they outscored Hudson Valley by a combined 17-4 in those contests, with a lot of good pitching performances coming as well as offensive performances. And one of the guys we're going to talk about a little bit tonight is Frederick Bencosme, who in April had a little bit of bad luck, which was something we had talked about on the show. And in the month of May, he has really started to pick things up, a trend over his last 11 games. He has slashed 378, 439, 622, and that was coming into Tuesday night's game. So the stats will be updated by the time you listen to this, most likely. But Bencosme starting to pick things up. So, Nick, I'm going to turn this over to you. We'll focus on Bencosme for a minute first. His walk to strikeout numbers all year have been really good. He was having bad luck on balls in play. What do you think has been the difference maker for him over the last 2 weeks?
I mean, he's got this highly graded hit tool that he had for years now, and he's just starting to show it. I mean, a 20-year-old kid, basically. Still, he doesn't turn 21 until Christmas. His birthday is on Christmas Day. So, I mean, he doesn't turn 21 until Christmas.
He is a gift.
Literally. Like, I wasn't expecting to see this kind of production from Bencosme, to be honest, that we've seen the last couple of weeks, just because he is 20. But the Orioles have been super aggressive with him. I mean, he only played 2 games in the FCL, 59 games with Delmarva last year before getting promoted to Aberdeen at 19. And now, like, I wasn't really shocked at all by his start because he is so young. And that was last week when we talked about like park factors. And it turns out Aberdeen doesn't really have those like extreme park factors that we kind of thought they did. It's kind of a little bit more balanced. But I talked about how, for the college guys, this is their first full year in pro ball, typically when they're reaching Aberdeen. And for the younger guys like Bencosme, the international players, they're so young because the Orioles are being so aggressive with them. And so you're 19, 20 years old facing high A pitching. He's 2.5 years younger than the competition in high A. Yeah, I think he's settling in. I mean, he's got a 15% walk rate, which is absurd. That's up from like 10 or 11% he had in Delmarva last year. And I know he hasn't hit a home run yet. And I know the national media kind of caught on to Bencosme kind of midway through last year. And the one thing you kept seeing was he's got to hit for power. He's got to tap more into that power to kind of separate himself and start moving up these prospect ranks. The ISO's up. I mean, the ISO is like 40 points higher compared to what it was in Delmarva. So he doesn't have the home runs, but he's got 7 doubles. He's got 2 triples. He's hitting extremely well right now. And I think this is what we saw in Delmarva. It just took him a little time to settle in. It's despite what you see kind of on social media with the Orioles fans and prospects, a little patience goes a long way. And we're seeing that with Bencosme.
Yeah, I think I might have, I don't know if it was here on the podcast or on the WhatsApp group, but after those first few weeks, I was like, he's not really striking out and he's walking a lot. And his BABIP is so low. I think it's going to turn around, and then boom, he's gone crazy ever since then. But I think he was being too patient in the beginning of the year. I mean, he had 19% walk rate, but just was not hitting for average or power. Then all of a sudden, his walk rate over his last 13 games is 11.5%, same as his strikeout rate, which is pretty darn good. And all of a sudden, he batted .349 over those 52 plate appearances. So I think, he's a free swinger who can walk, but at the same time, like, that's his best tool, is that just pure hit tool. So I think he was just maybe being a little too patient, but now he's free swinging again and hitting the ball all over the field.
Yeah, it felt like early on he was having bad luck on balls in play. And what's interesting to me is you're now at 100 plate appearances on the season. 15% walk rate, 16% strikeout rate, and a 110 WRC plus. And I feel like with the Aberdeen hitters, you really have to look more at the underlying metrics than you do the raw home run total. Nick just brought up his ISO. The WRC plus would be another metric that I would look at too to figure out Bencosme is hitting the ball harder. He is, more valuable of a hitter now in terms of run production than he was last year at Aberdeen. It's not going to show up in the home run power because he's 20 years old at high A, and Aberdeen's not an easy ballpark to hit home runs in, especially when you're a guy like Bencosme who sprays the ball all over the field. He's not a dead pool hitter, and I don't know that he ever will be. But you can look at the underlying trends and feel like, okay, he's doing the things that he does well this year, but you can start to see signs of improvement in the power. And let's face it, if he has those good bat-to-ball skills with a high walk rate as a second baseman, how many home runs does he really need to hit? 15 to 20 in a good year is probably enough for him to be an everyday second baseman in the major leagues.
Yeah, when Connor Norby was drafted, I think people were saying 10, 15 home runs a year, but he's going to give you a good batting average. Well, we see that's definitely gone up, the power numbers since then. And I feel like Bencosme, he's tall, he's lanky, he's got the frame. I think, 6 feet, pretty tall for a baseball player. He's got the frame to add a little bit of power. I think he did add some muscle over the offseason. I think he's going to be fine from the power department, maybe like a 30 doubles, 10 home run, 15 home run type of guy. But as long as he's slashing the ball all over the place and can take a walk, and I think his fielding has improved a little bit too this year. So I just think maybe once he gets to Bowie, we might see a little bit more of that home run power. And at this point, I'm thinking he'll get to Bowie this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know how many of those. He's got 7 doubles, and I don't know off the top of my head. Like, I feel like there's a lot of games at Aberdeen we don't get to watch because some of these high A clubs don't have, any broadcast. But how many of those doubles are like deep fly balls, doubles to the wall? Like, so how many of those doubles could turn into home runs if he's in a better ballpark, better hitting environment, and as he does continue to fill it? Because like I said, he's only 20 years old. So, and Bob was right. He does look a lot bigger. He looks a lot more muscular this year, and which, I mean, didn't take much when you saw him last year. He's a skinny beanpole. And I mean, now you're like, he's going to continue to develop physically. And so if that happens, maybe those doubles do start to turn into home runs a little bit more, and you start to see that power. That's the one thing that kind of concerned me, is like, all right, he's so young for the level, but also, like, are the Orioles going to try to say, like, hey, you've got to start lifting the ball more. Let's start focusing on trying to get more home run power. Maybe something like the early days of this podcast when it was Ryan McKenna. What's wrong with Ryan McKenna? And it was like, well, are the Orioles trying to turn him more into a power hitter, and now he's just kind of losing it? I almost was wondering, like, are they going to try to do that with Bencosme, or just let him continue raking? And they're just letting him continue to rake. And I don't really necessarily think he needs the home runs, even like kind of like Bob talked about, because he's got speed, he's fast on the base paths, he's super athletic, he can get you 30-40 doubles in a season. If you're walking at this rate that he's doing and you're not striking out, like he doesn't strike out, you don't need the home runs.
And it seems like at this point they're just letting him add that strength and let that add some impact to his game, get the exit velos up. And honestly, the way this team has developed, this organization has developed players and hitters especially, wouldn't surprise me if, once he gets used to that added strength and he does eventually start lifting the ball more, and who knows at that point. But at this rate, I think he's fine just playing his own game, and it's worked so far. He's still ahead of the curve big time, so it's all good.
There's more individual performances to dissect with Aberdeen. But right now, the Ironbirds, as of Tuesday night, their game in Winston-Salem is currently in a delay. When you look at the standings, things aren't that impressive for them, 13-8 coming into the week. But they're coming off a pretty competitive series against a good Hudson Valley team at home. Jackson Holliday is there and pretty much off to as fast of a start as you could have asked for him at high A. So, Bob, just looking at the Ironbirds overall, do you feel like that this is a team that could be on the upswing a little bit now that not only they have Holliday, but that some of the guys who we penciled in for good seasons coming into this year are starting to produce?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially, Holliday, he might be just a spark plug for a couple weeks and then off to Bowie at this rate. I mean, the kid is unbelievable. But, yeah, I think it was just a matter of that offense, like we talked about with Bencosme. This is still, like, a lot of young guys, first time in full season ball from the get-go, from the jump, from last year's draft, and guys like Isaac De Leon and Bencosme, they are super young still and, learning at this level. Slow starts for a lot of guys like Fabian and Max Wagner had a very slow start. That got them off on the wrong foot, but the pitching's been great for the most part. And I think as the offense heats up, then the wins are going to start piling on, because the pitching has really – the offense only needs to score like 3 to 5 runs a night, and they should be good to go.
Yeah, the pitching, as we'll get into, has just been flat out dominant. A lot of guys here that should be in Bowie pretty soon. But, yeah, I mean, you just look at some of these other guys too. Like with Aberdeen, injuries haven't really been a concern either. They got Ryan Higgins and Reed Trimble on the IL right now as far as hitters are concerned. That's it. I don't think any pitchers have been added. No pitchers have been added to the IL since the start of the season in Aberdeen. So they're a healthy group. You mentioned Judd Fabian's kind of slow start. I think we'll talk about more guys who are off to improving starts to this year. Beavers and Fabian, I don't think really fall into that category. They've kind of had reversal this month where they had good Aprils, but kind of subpar Mays. But I think those are just two guys who are, the league has adjusted to them, and now it's time for them to adjust back. And so we know Dylan Beavers is going through the pretty notable swing adjustments, and I think it was John Mioli at the Baltimore Banner was kind of going to do a series kind of following Beavers throughout the year, chronicling those changes that the Orioles are making with him. So I think Beavers in his own right is kind of a bit of a project pick there, and Fabian as well. It's, I think Fabian's going to have like a Connor Norby type season in Aberdeen, where we look up in a couple of weeks, maybe like 2 months or so from now, and he's getting promoted to Bowie. And you look at the numbers, you're like, wait, why? Why is he getting promoted to Bowie? It's because the underlying data all says a completely different story. Kind of look at Connor Norby's numbers in Aberdeen, not that great. Gets promoted to Bowie, has a fantastic season. So not concerned about either of those guys, but I think the bats are just starting to settle in. Everybody's healthy, and yeah, this team is I think the bats were kind of like one of my favorite positional groups in this organization to begin the year, because you had all those college draft picks, but the pitching, kind of like last year, you don't really have a lot of the big names, but the pitching has turned out to be pretty spectacular for this Aberdeen roster.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird. We've been following obviously the minor leagues this whole past few years, and right now it's in a weird spot where all these guys have raced up to AAA, and now they kind of have hit the brakes right there. So it's kind of left a little bit of gap in AA and High A, where it's like AA's lineup is a little weak right now. But who's going to come up and help them out? Even with Aberdeen, there's not any like slam dunk promotion candidates other than maybe one or two. But it's just interesting now that the international guys are coming up and performing well in Low A, and hopefully they fill that gap in a little bit over the next year or two.
Look at the pitching side of things for a minute. One guy that is worth highlighting right now is Alex Pham, who is working as a starter after being primarily a reliever in college. Coming into this week, Pham was third in the organization in strikeout percentage, behind only Cade Povich and Gene Pinto, two guys that we consider to be kind of top 20, top 25 prospects. Over his last two starts, Pham has a 17-4 strikeout to walk ratio, which includes 11 strikeouts against Hudson Valley last week. Just to give a little bit of background on Pham, because he's not a guy that we have highlighted a lot on this show. He was the 19th round pick out of San Francisco by the Orioles in the 2021 draft. Last year, he went to Delmarva, got off to a dominant start out of the Shorebirds bullpen before being promoted to Aberdeen. He barely gets to Aberdeen, and about a month in, goes on the IL, misses about 2 months before coming back, and the results were pretty uneven, to say the least. Struck out 30 batters in 20 2/3, walked 11 in that span, and posted a 5.66 ERA. That was exclusively out of the bullpen. Now he's appeared in 6 games this year and has 4 starts total, 23 1/3 innings pitched, 34 strikeouts, 12 walks, and a 1.93 ERA. His underlying data is also very good. So you can look at that and realize that it might not be a complete fluke. So, Nick, I'll start with you on this one, because you were actually the one who posted the strikeout percentage tweet to our account on Monday at BSL and the Verge. Pham's not a name that I think we would have penciled into that back in March or even the very beginning of the season, but he's worked his way into, at least statistically, for the first few weeks of the season, the top tier of pitchers in the Orioles farm system.
Yeah, I did not expect to see Alex Pham pitching as well as he has been this year. And I've been a fan of his since he was drafted, but mostly because he's got a kind of ridiculous curveball there. And he's like 5 foot something. I think he's listed at like 5'11", but I think that is very generous by like 3 or 4 inches. And he's come from this small school. So like, I wasn't expecting a ton in terms of like prospect status with Pham, but now I'm kind of watching him wondering, is this a guy who we see make a name for himself in Bowie by the end of the year? Like, he's got a 4-pitch mix, so he's got that starter's toolbox to work with. The fastball velo is not going to blow you away, but again, I think we talked about him when we highlighted him on the last segment a couple weeks ago, but Jeff Ponce was at a game, saw Alex Pham, had a good tweet out, put out, the fastball velo is only like 91, 92, so it's not going to blow you away, but it's got good ride. He's got a slider, changeup, and that multi-plane curveball. And the thing that impressed me the most with Pham, when I was looking at his game log, I hadn't realized that half of his outings this year have come against Hudson Valley. So 3 out of 6 times he's taken the mound, he's pitching against the same team. Like you mentioned, Hudson Valley pounded Aberdeen in that first series. And Pham made the start, gave up 7 runs in 3 1/3 innings. Only 4 of those earned, but still 7 runs in 3 1/3 innings, walked 3, struck out 4. And he's faced him 2 more times since then. He's thrown a combined 9 innings, allowed 1 run on 4 hits with 16 strikeouts and 2 walks. It's like when you repeatedly get matched up against the same team and get better and better in each outing, I'm paying attention. And I mean, his last 2 starts against 2 different teams, Hudson Valley and I think Brooklyn, both of them were 5 innings, 1 hit, no runs. And so like, that's absurd. And I don't know if I'm ready to like put him in my top 50 rankings, but I'm watching him closely now and not just like he's fun to watch, because I'm a nerd and nerd out on these minor league games, but he's fun to watch could this guy like make it in AA? And I don't know.
Yeah, he's like the anti-Elias guy he's a little bit shorter. Usually he goes after these super tall, Goliaths, and even Jared Beck even taller than that. But it's interesting, right? I did not expect him to be getting these 4 or 5 inning stints. Like I didn't expect him to start games. I thought he was like a 2 inning at a time, maybe 3 bullpen guy. And here he comes out this year starting, age 23. It seems like same with Daniel Fetterman. There's a bunch of guys who it's like undrafted or a late pick, and all of a sudden they're starting after seemingly being a reliever, and they find success. This organization is pretty good at that so far in the minors. We'll see how it carries up. But Pham, last season in high A, he had 20.2 innings pitched, 5.66 ERA, but his FIP was 3.61. Over 20 in a 2/3, I said that. This year, over 23 and a third innings, he's got a 1.93 ERA and a 3.61 FIP. So identical FIP, not identical ERAs. Strikeout rate were the same between the 2 seasons. Walk rate, pretty much everything was pretty similar other than BABIP. So I think maybe they saw this, beyond the base numbers last year, and we're like, okay, we might have something here. And so far this year, he's shown it a lot.
That's a good point, Bob, and something I wanted to touch on, which is that we have seen a lot of guys that were primarily relievers up until this year working out of Aberdeen's rotation. And we know that last year, 2 of the big breakouts in the Orioles farm system on the pitching side were Ryan Watson and Noah DeNoyer, who had worked primarily as relievers. And then in Watson's case, worked mainly as a starter at AA. DeNoyer got more starts than I think we would have expected him to at the beginning of the year. So is there something you think this organization looks at to try to figure out if you take a guy that was like Pham, primarily reliever in college, and figure out, can he be effective over 5 or 6 innings? And what are those attributes that maybe they look for?
Seems like hoppy fastball, number 1. You have feel for a breaking ball. You at least have feel for a few other pitches outside of your fastball, and then I feel like they think they can teach you the sweeper and the changeup. I think that's pretty much the recipe at this point. So, yeah, so far so good. Hopefully keeps up.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of these guys, I mean, Alex Pham's the exception here because he's so, I don't want to say tiny, but compared to some of his peers, he is kind of tiny. But, I mean, you look at their repertoires, like Ryan Watson throws like 5 different pitches. I'm pretty sure all these guys have such deep repertoires that it's just about refining it and giving them an opportunity to kind of throw these pitches. I mean, I'm looking at we get, depending on where they pitch, sometimes we get, I remember like Dylan Hyde pitched in the MLB Draft League. So we got a lot of those. You can find a lot of the tweets from the MLB Draft League accounts looking at kind of the, spin rates and everything on a lot of his pitches. And I think of someone like Ryan Long, I mean, on this Aberdeen roster. I mean, he was someone after the draft. I think it was one of the facilities he was working out at. I mean, they posted a clip. He was throwing like 6 different pitches and just some crazy spin rates, good velo numbers, good movement profiles in some of these pitches. I mean, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for, don't worry about what position you pitch at in college and how the college coach uses you. They're looking at the underlying metrics on these pitches, pitch shape, all that good stuff. We can build you up into a starter. It doesn't take that long. Look at Pham. It took him 2 years in the system, barely. We can build Ryan Watson, good example as well. We can build you up in this system if you've got the goods. And maybe they just didn't get that opportunity in college, and the Orioles are giving them that opportunity.
Noah DeNoyer as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I don't know what the long game is. I mean, obviously, you're looking to find your Christian Javier's, the Framber Valdez of the world, but also feel like maybe they might see it, just multi-inning relievers in general being a little bit underrated right now. That Moneyball aspect where you got guys who can come in, go one time through, a lineup and shut them down. And I think maybe that's what they're building an army of, that they can go through in the minor leagues.
We'll turn our discussion back over to hitters. And one guy that has caught my eye in recent weeks, because he got off to such a slow start and now seems to be climbing out of it, is Max Wagner. Wagner got off to a very slow start at Aberdeen this year, but has started to pick things up of late. Coming into Tuesday, he had a 975 OPS in the month of May with 4 home runs. That was after a very sluggish April. What is interesting, though, and I've been the one on this show who says don't read too much into minor league platoon splits, and I'll reiterate that here again, but this is also not something we see a lot from a right-handed hitter, which is that Wagner is significantly worse against right-handed pitching than he is left-handed pitching. Coming into Tuesday night, 18 games, 27 at-bats against lefties. He had a 370 average with an OPS of over 1,000. 28 games and 78 at-bats against right-handers, a 128 average and a 558 OPS. Now, in Tuesday night's game, before it went into a delay, we don't know if they're going to resume yet or not, Wagner did have 2 hits off of a right-handed pitcher. But still interesting to see those platoon splits this early in the year. And Nick, we actually talked about this a little bit coming into tonight. So Wagner, it feels like, is a very hard guy to get a read on. And my theory on it is that it's easy to group him into the same category as Dylan Beavers and Judd Fabian, when in reality, Wagner, although a college hitter, just like Fabian and Beavers and part of the same draft class, might be a little bit more raw than those 2 guys at this point. So what have your impressions been so far of him?
Yeah, like I just mentioned, I think Dylan Beavers was a project, right? And he was drafted like 33rd overall, I think. Super high ceiling. If he doesn't hit, like, we know the odds of guys hitting, right? These draft prospects. But if he does hit, I mean, you've nailed the 33rd overall draft pick. And Max Wagner is even more of a project, though, because he has such limited playing time in college. But you look at the growth already, and he hit 154 in April with a 506 OPS, and now in May, Tuesday not included, where, like you mentioned, he's got 2 hits. I think it was 2 for 2. If I can't remember, can't look it up right here. Yeah, 2 for 2 with a walk tonight so far. So not including tonight, he's got a 250 average with a 975 OPS in May. And all that comes actually on the year. He only has a 224 batting average on balls in play. So maybe a little bit of bad luck there as well. He's striking out a lot, but the walk rate is still around 12%, and the power is really starting to come through. He's also, which adds a little bit more weirdness to this Max Wagner, I don't really understand you profile, is he's got 10 stolen bases. He's 10 for 12 in stolen base attempts. He stole 4 bases in college at Clemson in total. So he already has 3 times that as a pro. He had a couple last year as well. So he's got 12 stolen bases as a pro. He had 4 in college. And I know, like, Aberdeen's got some speedsters like Valdez, Jackson Holiday, Dylan Beavers, like these guys you expect to swipe bags, but I don't know if it's like rule changes, playing on turf so often, because I think Brooklyn and some other, seems like a lot of these high A fields are also like turf fields. I don't know if it's some of that, or they're just facing teams with bad catchers that, Roberto Mercado's like, just run. When you get on base, you got the green light, go. I don't know, but Max Wagner just adds more to this confusing profile that I don't know if I fully understand. Power hitting third baseman, though, with speed, I'll take it. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to have any like definite or like hardcore takes about Max Wagner this year, just because he is so much of a project. He's very young. He's only 21. I think he's still 21 right now. Yes, he's a very young college bat who didn't play that much at Clemson. I know he's a 2nd round pick and people are going to want to see instant production from him, but he's so young. I think he's got a much longer leeway here. And I like that the Orioles are going after draft picks like this, because the farm system is so stacked. It gives you plenty of opportunity for guys like Wagner to just kind of sit back in high A, maybe take a little bit longer in double A and develop. And let's see what happens with him. But I'm happy with the growth we've seen in the last 2 weeks we've seen from him.
Yeah, he doesn't turn 22 until late August. So definitely was drafted young, kind of like Trimble, Rhodes, and guys like that who are college picks, but on the young side. And honestly, if you take out his first 5 games where he went 0 for 21 or something like that, his season looks a whole lot better overall. Just taking those first 5 games out since April 13th, he's batting .235 with an .836 OPS, 124 WRC plus, 13.5% walk rate, 27% strikeout rate. It's a little high, but we mentioned he's raw. 8.9 speed rating, 2.3 or .235 ISO. So honestly, by the end of the season, hopefully he'll make those first 5 games irrelevant. But yeah, that was a very notable thing. I think even in our WhatsApp group, we're like, well, Max Wagner, no hits this season so far for like a week. But ever since then, he's slowly come around. And yeah, I like Nick. I'm not exactly sure what to make of him, but I do like that, they moved him to lead off, I think, and that's when he eventually got off his streak to start the year. Seemed maybe a little confidence thing going on, but I like the way he's been hitting the ball lately. He can definitely hit the ball far when he gets a hold of one.
This will put a little bit of Wagner's inexperience in the context, or at least relative inexperience in the context. He will not turn 22 until August 19th of this year. His career at Clemson began in 2021, and he had only 99 plate appearances across 35 games that season. He started the 2022 season on the bench, but then worked his way into the lineup and had a breakout year with 27 homers and an OPS of over 1,300, which led to the Orioles selecting him in the second round last year. At the time of the draft last year, we noted, and a lot of national outlets noted as well, that this was a helium pick. This was a guy who caught fire in the spring, never stopped hitting, and the Orioles clearly liked something in his profile, but he's going to, take a little bit of time and take a little bit of work. This is something to think about, which is that we know that down in Del Mar, Carter Young is another college hitter that is going to require a lot of work. Do you feel like Wagner is maybe kind of a notch above Carter Young at this point and below Fabian and Beavers, or how do you see that?
Definitely a notch above Carter Young. Carter Young, he can take a walk. He can take a walk, and he can play defense. Got to get that hit tool up and running a little bit. I'm not giving up on him by any means. He's also another young college draft pick who's only 21. So, yeah, but I think Max Wagner is more proven than that. Clearly not on the Fabian or Beavers level for me at this point. But, yeah, Carter Young, at least we spent the money.
Yeah, like I just mentioned, it's the way how deep this farm system is. It affords the Orioles the opportunity to take bigger project guys. And so like Carter Young can be that project guy. He's a high risk, high reward guy. And I like that they're doing it. I hope this upcoming draft class, we're not going to get into that tonight, but I hope this upcoming draft class, we see more of that. We see this team take more risk. Unless you're playing, I don't envision the Orioles unloading the farm system this year, going all AJ Preller quite yet. Hopefully there is a trade or two when we see some big names moved, but it's still so deep that every position pretty much that you can afford to take on guys like this. I think don't look at Judd Fabian's kind of just basic stat line, like box score stat line right now. I think he's playing better than his overall numbers. Like I mentioned, that Connor Norby S season in high Aberdeen. His defense, he is a true center field prospect. If the bat wavers a little bit, the defense has not wavered at all. I haven't watched a lot of Max Wagner defensively over at third base, so I can't really speak to that. But yeah, I'd say the ceiling is close to Fabian's. But yeah, Wagner is, this is a guy. If you just sit and let him cook a little bit longer, let him develop in high A, take the lumps, sit back and take the lumps, I think we could be rewarded with a pretty highly regarded prospect here. And a guy who, once he reaches AA Bowie, starts to show out a little bit more. You start to see even more power. And then that becomes a guy that I don't know where like the national outlets have him in the top 30, but this is a guy who I could see with a good year very quietly. I don't think he's a guy that many people are going to talk about very much, but very quietly jumping into like the top 10 to 15 range by the end of the year.
Yeah, and he feels more like a Hudson Haskin type who kind of goes under the radar, just level by level, year by year, doesn't get invited to spring training, but then rakes AAA before injuring his hamstring. And where is he? Off topic. But yeah, I think he's the guy that you're not going to see people again clamoring for call him up, promote him. But at the end of the day, in 3 years, he could be a very important piece, whether it's in a trade or to come up.
Like Nick said, we haven't had a chance to see a lot of his defense this year, but coming into this year, a lot of national outlets did have it graded pretty highly, especially the arm strength. We had him around the early 20s coming into our list preseason. So I think that's where most national outlets had him. So Wagner with a good year, and depending on what happens above him in the farm system in terms of guys getting graduated or maybe traded or maybe some players regressing, which doesn't seem to be happening yet, but you always allow for the possibility of that he could be in that 10 to 15 range, because you look at the tools, he's got a couple of loud tools. He's got the power, he's got the arm strength to play third base, and those are all things that work well for him.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I also haven't seen a ton of his defense at third base, but I think the book on him was that he was okay over there with some potential, and maybe he moves around a little bit. Obviously, I think that's what the Orioles do. They move you around. Look, Jordan Westberg's been playing right field a little bit. Anthony Santander's been playing first base at the pro level. The mix and match. Taron Vavra behind the plate, third catcher emergency. So versatility is key, but the bat's what's going to get you there.
We'll shift our attention back to Aberdeen's pitching staff now, because we got to talk about, of course, one of our favorites here at On the Verge, Gene Pinto. Pinto was pitching well enough to go to Double-A Bowie at this rate. He is now 7 starts into his season, 30 1/3 innings pitched. He has struck out 49 batters and walked just 12, posting an ERA of 2.08. The one flaw that Pinto had last year at Aberdeen was his walk rate. So despite the fact that he struck out 103 batters in 91 2/3 innings there last year, you could look at his numbers and see that the walk rate of 4.5 per 9 innings was a little high, and that maybe if he went back to Aberdeen and get his command under control, he would be refined for Bowie. He has now gotten that walk per 9 down to 3.6 at Aberdeen to start the season off, and the strikeouts are much higher than they were a year ago. So you're kind of wondering at this rate, why is he not in Bowie? I think he's going to be the first guy up from Aberdeen's pitching staff. I think Justin Armbruster could be in Norfolk before too long. But Bob, you kind of had an interesting thought about this, which is that we are still looking at a logjam in this organization of pitching, especially this AAA level, that's keeping guys like Pinto from moving up right now.
Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting because the Double-A lineup could use 4 or 5 guys, but the pitching staff could use 4 or 5 guys to get out of there to create room for the guys in High A who deserve to be up. It's for a team whose cupboard is bare when it comes to pitching. You have like 8 legitimate starters that are, tandeming in Bowie, and Pinto deserves to be one of them. He has lowered his walk rate by 2%, but he has raised his strikeout rate by 13%. He's more than doubled his strikeout to walk percentage, and his numbers are just ridiculous right now. I saw a tweet from @ProspectTilt that said only 3 qualified pitchers aged 23 or younger have a strikeout rate over 13 and a swinging strike percentage over 18. That's Christian Mena in Double-A, but his swinging strikeout rate is 18.3. Ben Brown between Double and Triple-A, 18.5. Gene Pinto, 19.8. I don't think it's hit people. We were on this train. Just let it be known, we were on the Gene Pinto train very early. He's about to take off. That swinging strike percentage is top 5, 6 in all of minor league baseball, and he's still pretty young. He's 22 all season long. He'll be in Double-A before you know it, striking out or getting people to swing and miss more than DL Hall, more than anybody in the Orioles system. So we called it.
Yeah, people still don't listen to us. My thoughts about Gene Pinto is just like, why is this man still in Aberdeen? I thought last week the tweet was going to come. We were going to get the tweet from Bowie. Welcome to Bowie, Gene Pinto. It didn't happen. All right, he has another great week in Aberdeen. Probably his best week. Did he pitch twice last week? I can't remember if he pitched twice or not. He did. Another great week in Aberdeen. Still doesn't get promoted. 2 weeks, nobody getting promoted. But I think one of you guys made this point earlier. I think with the way promotions worked last year, there's some weird timing going on. So I don't think we're going to see as many promotions and the craziness like we saw last year. But another point, Like for me, it's everybody's clamoring, why isn't Jordan Westbrook in the major leagues? I want to know why Gene Pinto is not in Bowie right now. I mean, he's got the second highest strikeout percentage in the organization behind Cade Povich, and it's at 39.2%, which is absurd. You mentioned the lowered walk rate. It's down 2% from last year. Is 9.6% still too high? Yes. But when you're striking out nearly 40% of hitters, you've got a 2.08 ERA, a 2.22 FIP, a near 50% ground ball rate, a whip of right around 1. I mean, there's nothing else you can prove in high A. He had 91 innings in high A last year. He's already up to 30 innings this year in high A, showing notable improvements across the board. I think he's outperforming the breakout year he had in Delmarva at this rate. I think it's just time for a new challenge. And even if you have to stick him in Bowie's bullpen, I do it. Just get him to Bowie already. But I mean, regardless, like I'm happy to see the improvements. I'm happy to see him getting back on track. You mentioned the swinging strike rate. I actually saw a tweet. This was probably a little bit older. So yeah, at one point he had, I think it was at TJ Stats on Twitter. This was from about 10 days ago, so I don't think it included the update. But at one point, a week ago, he had the second highest swinging strike rate in all of high A and a 39% call strike plus whiff percentage. That's insane. An insane number. So he is pounding the strike zone more often this year, and these high A hitters cannot touch him. Put him in double A, and let's see what he can do against double A at bats, because I think he's done at high A.
Last week may have been Pinto's best week of the season so far. Combined in 2 outings against Hudson Valley, he went 8 in the third innings, struck out 15, only walked 2, and allowed 1 run on 3 hits. The Renegades hitters batted just 107 against him with a 372 OPS. So pretty much dominated what is a good high A lineup in Hudson Valley.
Yeah, we got to get away from Hudson Valley. They're a good team, and Aberdeen has been playing them nonstop.
Yes, please mix it up from here.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the velo is, we've seen it bump in the velo these last week or so, last couple of weeks with Pinto. I know very early on in the year, he was like 89, 88 to like 90, 91 or so. There was that game against Hudson Valley. I remember the broadcaster was like, when Pinto cruised, the broadcaster was like, I don't think he's eclipsed 90 miles per hour, because he was just slider. Maybe he is just a fastball slider guy as he moves up the ranks, but he's a pretty darn good one. Like, just move this guy up already. We've got to see him against better competition.
Yeah, the slider is ridiculous. The changeup is pretty good as well. The fastball, it's super inconsistent. I saw him pitch 3 times live last year. The first time he barely cracked 90. Second time he was pumping 95, 96, and then the third time he was like 90 to 92. So definitely needs some consistency there. He might be just a multi-inning reliever type long term, but I think he'll be a good one. So, yeah, still justifiably high in our rankings.
Speaking of strikeouts, let's talk about Cade Povich now. Povich last week against Harrisburg had what is really his best start of the season so far. 5 shutout innings, allowed just 3 hits, 1 walk against 10 strikeouts. So in terms of game score, Povich puts up a 70 in this one. He had a higher one against Richmond a few weeks ago, which was 73. But both outings are pretty dominant when you consider the totals across the board. And an interesting thing about Povich has come out in the last week or so. Earlier this month, he did an interview with Glenn Clark over at PressBox. You can go to pressbox.com to listen to that or to read an article about the interview. And we've talked about before how Povich has a repertoire that's 5 or 6 pitches deep. In that interview, he noted that he does have a deep repertoire, but that he's actually kind of put the slider on the back burner and is mainly focusing on 4 pitches so far. That formula, if that's what he carried into Richmond and that's what he's had to this point, has been really successful for him. As we noted, he has the highest strikeout percentage of any pitcher in the Orioles minor league system to this point in the season. And across the board, over 6 games, he has held hitters to an opponent's average of 210 with a 582 OPS. He has struck out 44 batters in 26 2/3 innings pitched, while walking 10 and giving up just 1 home run in that span. So Povich really does seem to be locked in right now. Bob, I'll start with you. We knew coming into this year that Povich had the potential to climb even higher. And if you looked at Kylie McDaniel's rankings over at ESPN, you knew that that was top 100 potential. But how far can he go this year?
I think he could make his major league debut in September. Honestly, just get a taste if things continue to go perfectly, basically. But I think bare minimum, he's pitching every 5 days in AAA to set himself up to come into spring training next year, competing for a spot, probably not getting one, but at least competing for a spot, kind of like DL Hall, Grayson. Well, Grayson had a little bit of a advantage coming into the spring, but kind of like DL Hall and that type of thing, where he can get some starts in spring training next year, be a late cut, and then be one of the first guys up come first half of the year next year. And it's pretty interesting that he's had one like really bad start, 2 other not great starts, and yet he's got a 3.37 ERA, a 1.43 FIP, 1.65 xFIP. Like his BABIP is 0.364, so he's been kind of unlucky with that. It's just, if he has his command, forget it. You're done. The fastball command, I think, is the last thing that needs to come around. The curveball is ridiculous. I think that's his best pitch. He seems like he can spot it whenever he wants, but the fastball, when he's got that plus his other stuff, it's tough to hit. I think Kylie McDaniel might be ahead of the game when it comes to Cade Povich being a top 100 prospect, because I think by the end of the year he might be on a few other ones as well.
Yeah, we're still talking about Povich. I'm in a closet for people not watching live since I'm in the middle of a move. I was in a closet and I forgot my charger and there are no outlets in the closet. So now I'm out of breath. Yeah, Povich is like this. I didn't read or see the interview he did there with Glenn Clark, but I did read John Muley's piece of the Baltimore Banner, and I think it kind of hit on some of the same things about how he's ditching the slider and moving towards the cutter, because Muley's piece, he talked a lot about Povich knowing, and the organization obviously knowing, but Povich being this kind of prototype growth mindset guy and being someone who was very adamant about preparing for facing lineups at the major league level that are stacked with righties. And so ditching the slider and going with the cutter, because the four-seamer kind of tails away from righties, but the cutter runs in on righties. And so, I mean, this is, he's got a 3.38 ERA right now, and the FIP is 1.43 with a 1.65 xFIP. So, I mean, even with his 2 quote-unquote bad starts this year, he's got 14 strikeouts and just 2 walks. And he's pitched about the same number of innings in Bowie this year as he did last year, and the strikeout rate is up from 25% to 40%, and the ground ball rate's up to 52%, and the walks are down. Like, I think a couple of things with Povich. He's firmly established himself as the 3rd best pitching prospect in this system. And if you want to say he's ahead of DL Hall, I would not argue you. To be honest, I think the ceiling is probably higher than Hall's. Maybe it's a bit of prospect fatigue with DL Hall, but I think Povich has a deeper pitch mix and he's got better control, obviously, which, isn't a terribly hard thing to do, but he's not far away from a promotion. But I think the thing with Povich is, clearly from the interview he did, John Muley's piece, the Orioles are trying to work with him on finding the pitch mix that works best. And now it's about getting that feel back for some of these pitches. He talked about not having a feel for the cutter since like spring or last year. So back in spring training, when he put the cutter back in his repertoire, having to get a feel for that pitch. So I think some of those quote unquote bad outings, which haven't really been bad because he's still not walking guys and still striking out a lot of guys, and he's been one of the unluckiest pitchers in all of minor league baseball this year. The BABIP is like absurdly high, I think. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I think what you're seeing is maybe, all right, when you get in this count, only throw this pitch. Like, we don't know what the game plan is going into some of these starts. So I think it's, hey, even if it's uncomfortable, even if they know it's coming, throw the cutter at all times when you're in this count. And if they hit it, that's fine. But the Orioles don't care if they hit it. If you give up a home run on the pitch, if you hit your location, all the metrics look good, pitch shape looks good, you're hitting your spots, that's what matters most. It's process over results down in the minor leagues. And I think that's important to keep in mind with Povich, because the strikeout rate is absurd. And I think it's just throw these pitches. You may not feel comfortable throwing them in this count or in this situation, but keep throwing it. If they hit it, they hit it, but just throw it. And so I think that's kind of what we're seeing in these bad starts with him, which have actually been pretty dominant.
And it is interesting that you say you might put Povich over Hall at this point, and I'm kind of getting there. I think Povich has a better chance of sticking as a starter, especially since we just found out tonight that DL Hall pitched 3 innings as a deloading process to, sounds like, get him ready to come up to the majors out of the bullpen. So if his, at least for this year, his chances of a starter are going down, then yeah, I think you can definitely make the argument that Povich should be over Hall.
Yeah, that's not a hot take to say that Povich is better than Hall. And I'm someone who, in our recent update for patrons, still had Hall over Povich, but Povich does have the deeper pitch mix. And what's interesting is if you look into terms of his development, he has been very good against left-handed hitters this year, as well as right-handed hitters. Right-handed hitters are only hitting 227 against him with a 599 OPS. And I mentioned earlier he's only allowed 1 home run. Half of his starts to this point have come at home in Bowie, which we know is a home run hitter's park. We know that if you make a mistake at Bowie and you leave a pitch hanging, that ball could go out of the ballpark. And Chase McDermott, who has been really successful overall so far this season, has run into that problem in some of his starts. You're not seeing that with Povich. It's really, I think, just for him about finding, like Nick said, that pitch mix that works for him, throwing strikes with that pitch mix consistently, getting the results that I could see him in AAA sometime in the next couple of months easily.
Hypothetical here, because I remember a while ago someone making a comment along these lines on Twitter to one of a Cade Povich post, and kind of hinting at the fact, like, could at the end of the year, Galaxy bringing in this a little bit, because I mean Povich still, he's got to get this feel for his mix. He's still got some things to smooth out, we'll say, in AA before he even gets promoted to AAA. So I agree with, we're probably not going to see him in AAA for a couple more weeks at least. And we know the Orioles are extremely hesitant in promoting guys once you get to AAA. But if Povich is still striking guys out at an absurd rate in AAA and things are going well, could you see any scenario where they add him to the roster late in the season as this high-octane lefty reliever out of the bullpen?
I absolutely could, yeah. Especially if, we're 27 and 15 now? Yeah, 27 to 15. Yeah, if we're still in the thick of it for a division title or even just wild card, even just if we make the playoffs, to have that weapon that there's not a lot of tape on, I mean, yeah, why not? All hands on deck.
Might even necessarily need to be as a weapon. It could be as a guy that's, all right, we need to make sure our starters are ready for the playoffs. Let's put Cade Povich in the bullpen because, we might only want to throw Tyler Wells 4 or 5 innings in some of his starts down the stretch. Grayson Rodriguez, we know, is going to be managed conservatively down the stretch. And I think there's a case for managing Kyle Braddis a little bit that way because he doesn't have a lot of major league time under his belt. So Povich could help out in that regard because if DL Hall goes into the bullpen, it's probably going to be a short outing relief stint. And you're going to wonder, does he pitch well enough that if CNL Perez continues to get, kind of mixed to below average results, that you can feel comfortable letting him go knowing you have Hall there as your insurance policy to be the lefty that can get guys out late in the game. Keegan Aiken wasn't really used as a long guy when he was in the bullpen before he got options. So if Povich is in the major leagues, I almost see him as kind of that backup option where you're going to give your starters a little bit of a breather down the stretch because you want them ready for the playoffs. And you could go to Cade Povich for 2 or 3 innings out of the bullpen. And you see Povich as a legitimate candidate to make the rotation out of spring training in 2024. Because if you see that, then why not give him a shot in the major leagues, even if you don't really use him that much, just to let him have that time up in the major leagues, that experience of being hopefully in the playoff chase before he goes into 2024 looking to compete for a rotation spot.
I thought it was an interesting comment. I'm glad you guys, that's kind of the same way I felt. But I'm not going to get too excited though, because Jordan Westberg has an OPS of like 5,000 and he's still going to stay in AAA. So I'm not getting my hopes up anymore. But it is something interesting to think about there with Povich, because he's a bigger weapon than Drew Rom. Could potentially be a bigger weapon than DL Hall. I mean, at this point, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, DL Hall had a decent outing tonight, I guess, but he's kind of up and down, and I don't really know at this point what the future holds for DL Hall. So we always talked about, like, well, could DL Hall be the guy that comes up at the trade deadline? And he's that kind of weapon that teams overpay for at the deadline. Maybe not so early as the trade deadline time, but could Cade Povich be that guy instead of DL Hall? I don't know. He's got to keep pitching well, though, but so far he's off to a great start.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go now into our final segment of the week where we like to shout out players who are outside of our top 30 list for something they've done recently, whether it's a good game, a good week, something interesting in their stat line that we want to note. And I'm going to go to Bob on this one because we're going to kind of turn the conversation back to the Ironbirds, specifically their pitching staff, because there was a guy we didn't mention in our conversation earlier because I knew Bob was going to recognize him here, deservedly so, in the final segment.
Yeah, Jake Lyons, a 2019 draft pick, 22nd round. Again, big guy, 6'5", 280 pounds. He's 24, going to be 25 in 3 or 4 months. And he's still in high A. After getting a taste of Double A last year, you think, what is there really to say about him? Well, how about a 2.41 ERA over 18 and 2/3 innings, 1.83 FIP, 2.89 xFIP. He's striking out 36.8% of batters, only walking 7.9%. I mean, this last week he had 9 strikeouts over 4 innings, 7 strikeouts over 3 innings the time before that. So just racking up the Ks, not walking many guys. His last 2 outings, 0 walks to 16 strikeouts in 7 innings. I mean, that's crazy. Another guy who probably should be in Bowie considering his age and what he's doing, but clearly they've been working on him. It's like the long game. The 2019 draft will never die. Even if it's just as a reliever, again, multi-inning reliever, these guys are coming up. Like Felix Bautista, he came up out of nowhere, skyrocketed. These older guys, even if they're still hanging around high A, double A, and they're a little bit older, transition them to the bullpen, let it eat, and they can rise up pretty quickly. So just wanted to shout him out. And then a completely different direction is 20-year-old Victor Gonzalez, who the Orioles acquired in a trade. Was it the Kevin Smith trade? He was a player to be named later, maybe. But he's an infielder who was international signee. But it's always going to be interesting to me when you see guys jump up to full season ball before the FCL season even starts. Doesn't mean a whole lot. Luis Gonzalez came up and he's been pretty bad for the Shorebirds, but Victor Gonzalez did come up. He's had 8 plate appearances. He is 1 for 7 with the hit by pitch. He had an interesting stat line last year in the FCL. Only 36 plate appearances, but he had a 105 WRC plus despite only hitting 120. He had a 27.8% walk rate and a 389 on base, so the ultimate Gunnar Henderson there. But yeah, just shout out to him for making it up to full season ball for the first time.
I like both those guys. And to go back to Aberdeen real quick, actually, before I talk about my guys, I don't have Aberdeen guys. But some guys we didn't mention, even out of the bullpen, Keegan Gillis' season line is 9 innings, no hits, no runs, 2 walks, 15 strikeouts. He's 6'8", 225 pounds of pure fireball coming out of that Aberdeen bullpen. That's great to see. He was hurt all year last year, so he's fully healthy and dominating. Nick Richmond, 9.2 innings, 4 hits, no runs, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts. And then Ryan Long, 22 and a third innings pitch, 2.01 ERA, 0.85 whip, 29 strikeouts to 9 walks in those 22 innings. Just absurd pitching down there in Aberdeen. But my guys this week that I wanted to highlight, I'm going to go down to Delmarva for the pitcher and go to Jared Beck. I think we touched on him earlier. The 7-foot lefty, 4 scoreless innings in an outing last week with 4 strikeouts. He's been used as the starter bulk relief innings guy this year. The ERA is over 5, but the FIP is 4.15 and the xFIP is 3.86. The strikeout rate has climbed higher and higher over his last couple outings. 50% ground ball rate. I just think if the organization can unlock his control with that massive frame, he's going to be a fun storyline to follow. And you talk about like can't miss prospects. He's literally a can't miss prospect at 7 feet tall. But And then I'm going to go up to Norfolk in a completely like non-prospect direction just to talk about Lewin Diaz for a minute, because everyone else in that Norfolk lineup gets all the hype, but Lewin Diaz was hovering around an OPS of 1,000 for a long time there. And he's coming off probably the worst week of his season, but we had kind of slim pickings this week for this segment. So I just wanted to highlight Lewin Diaz because on the year, he's got a 299 average and a 404 on base percentage, 125 WRC plus, and a 15% walk rate with a sub 20% strikeout rate. You compare his numbers this year to his last 2 years in AAA with Miami, the walk rate's up, the average is up like 40, 50 points. We talk about Joey Ortiz and Jordan Westberg being at the top of the exit velo leaderboards most nights, but Diaz is right there with them. And I have no idea where he gets a shot at with the Orioles because he's strictly first base DH. So I don't really think there's room because it appears now that Santander is now the backup first baseman. But he's having a great year so far. And, if another team sees what he's doing in the Orioles system, maybe they give up something for him over the next couple of weeks. Opens up more at bats for Heston Kjerstad because he's getting promoted to Norfolk sometime soon. And, we'll see if he can keep it up for the next few weeks. But so far, just shout out to Lewin Diaz. Kudos to him after a crazy offseason. I think he's out to prove everybody that he's worth that shot.
We know he's been clean before, so it could happen again. And good shout on Keegan Gillis, who, again, speaking of the next Felix Bautista, Yin-Yer Cano, who could just quickly rise to the top. Him and a guy Zach's going to talk about are some good candidates.
Yeah, and I will start there with my pitcher for this week, and that is Wanderson Charles, who had another good outing on Tuesday night as we were recording the show, recorded the win for the Bay Sox, his first of the season. He is now, with Tuesday's outing included, up to 6 2/3 innings pitched on the year with 11 strikeouts compared to 3 walks. He came over from the Oakland organization in the offseason, and he kind of caught our eye because he's listed at 6'4", 250 pounds, with his mound presence seems even bigger than that. His stuff can be electric at times, but he struggled with the walks mightily in Oakland's system. And for evidence of that, all you have to do is look at his line at AA Midland last year. 37 innings pitched, struck out 34, but walked 38 and had an ERA of over 11. The question we had coming into this season is, can the Orioles take a guy with this kind of stuff and harness his command a little bit? So far, they've been able to do that, and he's off to an excellent start at Bowie. You definitely want to keep your eye on him going forward. And for my hitter, welcome back, TT Bowens. It was good to see him in Aberdeen's lineup. Coming back after an injury delayed his start to the season. In his first game against Hudson Valley, he went 2 for 3 with a home run. He only got 1 hit for the rest of the week in that series in Hudson Valley. But that was a rehab assignment for him. He's now up in Bowie. And in his season debut for the Bay Sox tonight, 1 for 3. So hopefully Bowens is able to go into the Bay Sox lineup and inject a little bit of much-needed power for the Bay Sox. He's done that so far over the course of his career at Delmarva and Aberdeen. He's a frequent player in this section of the show. In fact, I sometimes feel like we should just call this the TT Bowens segment, but it's good to have him back on the field, and hopefully he's able to add to Bowie's lineup for the rest of the season.
We've got TT Bowens power coming into this lineup. Hopefully Toby Welk comes back sometime soon. Trying to see
Colin
who else.
Burns, where you at?
Colin Burns. I thought he was supposed to be back a couple of weeks ago, and that hasn't happened yet. But hopefully he's back. You got Connor Pavlotti and Ramon Rodriguez on the IL. I know Bowie is tough to watch a lot of nights because it's literally the top 3 guys in the lineup: Prieto, Kjerstad, Mayo, and then the rest of the lineup can be kind of rough some nights. John Rhodes is definitely coming around now that he's healthy, but I think Bowie's got some reinforcements coming, and they're definitely going to be an exciting team to watch again in a couple of weeks. Don't worry.
Well, reinforcements to replace the guys at the top of the lineup who probably will be in AAA.
Yeah, that's true. They'll be a more well-rounded lineup at least. But yeah.
I agree.
We will be back next week. We're planning to be back at our regular time since we won't have to compete with Shohei Ohtani, hopefully next Monday night. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at BSL on the Verge, and check out our other social media platforms on Facebook and Instagram. Also, head over to BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com, where you can check out the latest coverage on the Orioles, Ravens, college sports, and more. And while you're on the site, be sure to hop on the message board and join in discussing with fellow readers as well as contributors to Baltimore Sports and Life. For Bob Taylor and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to On the Verge.
That'll do it for this week's episode of On the Verge. Be sure to check out our Patreon page where you can help show your support for the show and get bonus content, including monthly top 50 updates to our prospect list and daily game recaps during the season, and much, much more.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.